And also not to mention that we actually deserve a culture of game developers that actually... I knew it. I knew it. It always happens at the most inconvenient time. Guys, I swear to God, man, if this thing clicks up one more time, guys, I swear to God. Anyway, as I was saying, we deserve a culture of game developers that are disciplined, game developers that aren't into instant gratification. It's one of the key ways we can actually get long-lasting, culturally significant products. Now, before I move on, there is something that I have to talk about, guys. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but Warner Brothers has shut down Monolith Studios. Like... What in the world? Like, this is elite level incompetency that we're seeing from WB Games at the moment, guy. How the hell do you shut down a studio that has only been gaining you W's and W's? But you know what? I know that most people are gonna talk to you guys about, oh my God, this is so bad. Warner Brothers are such idiots, blah, 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 blah. But what I'm actually interested in is the why behind it. Why did W Games execute an insane fuck up of biblical proportions? Why do these gaming studios keep making the same dumb mistakes over and over again? To answer this question, we are going to have to go deep, way deep. That's what she said. Way deep into the power games that are being played at the highest levels. You see, if I asked you the question and I said, who runs WB Games? What would you guys actually say? Most likely, you guys would actually say something like, it's the CEOs, right? I mean, they are the ones in charge. They are the executives. They are clearly the guys in charge, right? Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. You see, guys, WB Games isn't run by the executives. In fact, the executives are not even gamers. Hell, let alone, they're not even creatives. These guys are merely corporate foxes, bureaucrats climbing the corporate ladder and making decisions that have nothing to do with gamers. The only thing that these executives care about is making bonuses, getting their paycheck, and pleasing investors. WB executives are what you would call the middle managers of the actual elite class that actually rules behind the scenes. WB executives are basically your front man. You know, I'm talking Squid Game now. They are the ones that are on display, on stage, the mouthpiece of the shadow cabals, you know, that are ruling secretly behind the scenes. They are basically front-facing puppets. They're not real decision makers. So then the question becomes, who is? Who are these shadow cabal guys running things, if not the executives? Well, that, dear viewer, is where things get really interesting. I was actually under the impression that WB Games actually makes their own decisions. How hopelessly naive I was to actually think that. You guys are familiar with investment firms, right? BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. Well, these investment firms control trillions of dollars. They use this money to enforce woke policies on corporations and companies. So if certain companies and corporations need funding, they need to implement ESG scores and the like, otherwise they don't receive funding. Investment firms are basically what you would call the overlords of the woke industrial complex, I like to call it. They implement DEI scores, DEI mandates, and market manipulation. And then next up we have what I would call the DEI priests. The DEI priests are basically your classic DEI departments and HR and also activist groups, right? Now, these priests, they're simply there to enforce the woke ideology, making sure that every game is approved by the activist class. So you see, Warner Brothers hasn't been making games for a long time right now. The last time Warner Brothers was actually in the industry of making games, that was back during the Arkham era. That's the last time they were in the business of making great games. Hands down. I ain't even lying. If I'm lying, I'm dying. What Warner Brothers is doing right now is they're making ideological products. And if you don't comply, you're out. And like, guys, before we even go deeper into this thing, I mean, it's not like WB Games just started failing out of nowhere. They're actually following a pattern. I'll take you back to Gotham Knights, a DEI light disaster that didn't really impress anybody. Now, while Gotham Knights wasn't actually DEI heavy, it still did have, you know, that corporate DEI, you know, suave about them. You know what I mean? It was like a checkbox exercise instead of a real game. They didn't fully commit to what they were actually making or producing. They didn't push themselves as to like think about, if we have such a thing known as the flow system of the Arkham series that defines the Arkham series, how can we actually push that and take it to the next level? They didn't do any of that. Gameplay was bland, wasn't as sexy or polished as Arkham Knight was. If you notice, when preview footage for Gotham Knights was actually being shown, it it was mostly being compared to Arkham Knight, saying that Arkham Knight is like a 9 or a 10-year-old game, and look how smooth and amazing it is with the animations. Like, when I watch this, I feel immersed, I want to play this. But then when I look at something like Gotham Knights, it just feels like meh. And of course, it didn't even end there. Recently, what else did they do? They released Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad has been a massive disaster, a massive failure for these guys. What happened is Suicide Squad fell prey to the GAAS model. GAAS basically means games as a service model. That's when, like, instead of selling you a complete and full product, they be selling you bits of the game in pieces and pieces, just breadcrumbing you. They give you your battle passes, your season passes, your microtransactions. So that's what happened to Suicide Squad. And when you see such a thing being implemented, it usually speaks to one thing, and that is corporate greed. You see, Suicide Squad could have been an incredible game, but instead of focusing on a beautifully designed, rich, single-player open world, they instead shifted focus and went on to a live service cookie-cutter model, whereby our characters feel more like Fortnite rip-offs with Marvel humor injected into them rather than actual villains. And not to mention that Mortal Kombat 1 isn't even doing so well, man. So I'm basically trying to show you guys that what we're seeing is a systemic issue. You see, guys, there are rules when it comes to power. Rules that weak leaders ignore at their own peril. And WB Games broke every single one of those rules. The first rule when it comes to power is the illusion of power must always be maintained. Great rulers know that even if they are losing, they still need to make people actually believe they are winning. WB Games kept pretending that everything was fine, even when they were actually bleeding money. And the moment the illusion breaks, you lose all control. Rule number 2, never believe your own lies. You see, when the ruling class, when we're talking about political systems, is in charge, they push what we call political myths. Political myths are things such as democracy for the people, power to the people, Amanda! Or something like diversity, equity, and inclusion is a good thing. People deserve to see themselves represented. Those are what we call political myths. They are simply meant to keep the masses engaged and believing in your lies, while you, on the other hand, consolidate power. So what tends to happen sometimes is that elites will push a certain myth for so long that they eventually start to believe it. WB Games actually started to believe that DEI equaling success was a law of nature, instead of it merely being a corporate PR slogan. They forgot the truth that quality matters more than quotas. The third rule of power is destroy your enemies or strengthen them. Machiavelli warned that if you silence your critics instead of utterly destroying them, they tend to come back even stronger, more bitter, and more vengeful. You see, WB Games tried to shame players for rejecting their games, but instead of fixing the community, they ended up making more enemies. Another thing is, when the ruling class are in charge, or the elites are in charge, another purpose that the political myths tend to serve is that they are meant to protect against criticisms, so that when you, a concerned gamer, actually calls them out on their bullshit, they simply attack you and label you as problematic or misogynistic or toxic. According to Machiavellian politics, you do not support political myths that weaken your position, because the consequence of that is that people will end up seeing through your genjutsu or the illusion quicker, meaning that you won't be able to consolidate or hold on to power long enough. And secondly, do not force reality to bend to your will. If you see that something is not working, you adapt. You do not double down, as we see Warner Brothers doing here. Because there was a time whereby a report came out basically saying that Suicide Squad has been a major financial setback for WB Games, and WB Games came out and said, we need more live service games. we clearly need more. So you're saying we need more? So what you're saying is oh, by the way, the fourth rule of power is learning to adapt instead of doubling down and forcing reality to bend to your will. The fifth and final rule of power: a leader is only as strong as his army. If you weaken your own forces, you set yourself up for failure. Now, WB Games' mistake was forcing one of their most talented and successful studios into making games as a service model and stripping them of creative control. Many of the original devs who made Rocksteady great left the company over time because what WB Games Games is meddling. And the sad thing is, Gotham Knights Studio, WB Games Montreal, was never on the level of Rocksteady, but instead of strengthening them, WB Games forced them into rushed development cycles, ensuring failure. Instead of empowering one of their best studios, WB just bled them dry and then acted surprised when the game actually flopped. The lesson here is simple. Strong leaders protect and empower their best warriors. Weak rulers sabotage them and lose the war before it ever began. Now, I know I said 5 was actually the last rule, but you know what? Since I'm feeling generous today, I think I'll give you guys 2 bonuses. Rule number 6 of power. A ruler should only care about keeping the loyalty of his most powerful subjects. Appeasing outsiders leads to ruin. WB Games made games for Twitter activists instead of gamers. They listen to DI consultants and journalists, people who don't even care about games. The people who defend representation in games don't even care about the games they play. At this point, it should have been obvious. WB Games should have rather focused on the people that actually give them money, and that's us. Instead, they chose to alienate their paying audience, all to appease or impress outsiders who don't even play their games. A kingdom that ignores its strongest warriors in order to impress outsiders is a kingdom that will soon fall. And then the final and last bonus rule of power is, oh, come on, guy, I cannot win!